Hello, welcome to another episode of In the Trenches with Gang Green. I'm your host, Bubbs. Today is Friday, January 17th. Hopefully, everybody's having a good day so far today. This is episode 473 of the In the Trenches with Gang Green podcast. I thank you, as always, for joining me. Every day this week, we've had a podcast so far, and that continues. Another day, another pod. For those tuning in on YouTube, make sure to please like and subscribe. We are just 9 subs away from 500 at the moment of this recording. As always, appreciate those tuning in on all the different audio podcast platforms as well. Today, we got a couple different things to discuss with the New York Jets involving the GM search and the head coach search as well. Mike Borgonzi, one of the top general managers, is off the board. The Tennessee Titans, who went quickly through their GM search, locking up the Chiefs assistant GM as their new GM for Tennessee. We will break that down, what that means for the Jets, and where do the Jets go from here. My thoughts on it as well. And I also want to get into Josh McCown, who is gaining some steam to potentially become the next head coach here for the New York Jets. If Aaron Glenn and Brian Flores are not the guys, Josh McCown could potentially be in line to maybe get the job. So we'll discuss that possibility and where things stand with him as he's getting interviewed today as the Jets continue their long list of first-round interviews with head coach candidates. As always, before we begin, we got to get to our podcast partners, starting with our friends over at BetUS. Let's take a look at the Jets' next head coach odds. Aaron Glenn and Brian Flores lead the way. Glenn, the favorite, at minus 150. Flores right behind him, plus 250. Ulbricht's on here, which I don't see that happening at all. And you've also got Joe Brady, who feels like a potential fallback option if Glenn or Flores don't happen. So Brady there at plus 500. It's divisional weekend, my favorite weekend of the NFL season. If you want to get in on any of the betting action, click my link in the description of this video to get a 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000. Also, our friends over at SeatGeek. If you're looking for tickets for the hottest in entertainment, plays, concerts, shows, you name it, or any sports, basketball, hockey, baseball season's right around the corner. NFL playoff tickets, anything you're looking for, SeatGeek has it. Use promo code Bubs on Sports for $20 off your first purchase at SeatGeek and get yourself out to some awesome events. And also our friends over at Huga House. Huga House sweatshirts just released today. So if you want to get your hands on a sweatshirt or any of their awesome hats, use promo code Bubs at checkout for 15% off your first purchase. And then when you use that promo code again, you'll get 30% off your second purchase on your second item. So check them out and get yourself some awesome swag this January. Here we go. Episode 473. Thank you so much for tuning in. So we got some breaking NFL news today a little while ago that directly impacts the New York Jets. So Mike Vrabel last weekend off the board, head coach candidate number 1 off the board for the Jets out of the list they interviewed. And today the first GM candidate for the Jets is off the board, going elsewhere here to the Tennessee Titans. As Adam Schefter reported earlier, a decision in Tennessee. Titans haven't offered a contract yet, but plan to try to hire Mike Borgonzi, the Chiefs' assistant general manager, as their next general manager per sources. For many, Borgonzi was on the top, near the top of the Jets list. For many, Borgonzi was a guy that was on top of a few teams' list, the short list of teams that have general manager vacancies this offseason, that being the Titans no longer, Raiders, and obviously the Jets as well. For me, Dimitroff was still my number 1 choice. I'll throw out my general manager tiers here. Dimitroff was my number 1. Borgonzi was my number 2. I put him under the like it tier. And my intrigue tier was Mike Greenberg and Brian Gain, who I really like a lot as a guy who might honestly be my second choice now. I think Greenberg and Gain kind of 2 to 3 for me behind Dimitroff. I think both are interchangeable. I would be okay with both those guys. Dimitrov's been my number 1. But it is still obviously unfortunate to see Borgonzi, a guy I liked and a guy I would be interested to see the Jets bring in and hire, and would be happy with the hire if they made it, go to another team this early. And it's just another reminder here of where the Jets stand right now with this search. My number one guy is still out there. So, Dimitrov is a guy that I would really want. Obviously, I mentioned some of those other names. It's not like the Jets here this is the fifth general manager now to be hired and the Jets are completely running out of time. But it's another reminder here of how long this Jets search is. And I understand we all wanted a long search. I get all that. And I like that they're doing a longer search. And I like that they're looking over all options, casting a wide net. But we've all agreed, though, some of the head coaches that they've interviewed aren't exactly the top names, aren't exactly names that should really be in consideration for the job. And now you're an organization that's dragging your feet a little bit, and you just let one of the top candidates for general manager, a guy that many around the league believe should get an opportunity right now, is well deserving of an opportunity, go to a team who just fired their GM 10 days ago. Right? This is a New York Jets team that fired Joe Douglas on November 19th. They fired Robert Saleh week 5. Their whole thought process on all those moves, especially the Joe Douglas move, was season is over. Let's get a head start on the 2025 general manager and coach search. And right out of the gate, be one of the first teams to hire a GM, get a new regime in place. That was the whole plan. Right, week 11 is when they fired Douglas. To put into kind of picture here of the whole timeline, the Jets' first GM interview was Thomas Dimitrov. They interviewed him on December 16th. To put that into perspective, the Jets the day prior beat the Jaguars in week 15. So the Jets got off to an early start on this process, interviewed a few guys, 4 guys before the season even ended, right? Louis Riddick, Dimitrov, John Robinson, and Jim Nagy were the 4 guys that aren't with NFL teams that were allowed to be interviewed when the season was still going on. They also, of course, interviewed Vrabel in person last week of the season. So 5 interviews total. They're now up to 30 plus, and they haven't even started round 2. And it's Friday, January 17th. We went into this week. Early in the week, they finished round 1 of general manager interviews. We expected late in this week them to start round 2 and potentially have a GM in place by early to mid next week. But here we are, it's Friday, and we've got no sense of round 2 starting. And things are happening pretty quick. Other teams are getting guys in place. Other teams are going to start round 2 of head coaches first, soon here. The Jets, I still believe, have about 2 to 3 coaches left to interview before they get to round 2. So it's just another reminder here. Again, I like the whole idea of casting a wide net. Some of the names have been very questionable to me. If you're going to cast a wide net and it's not going to include a Pete Carroll, it's not going to include a John Gruden or any of those guys, and maybe their agents and maybe their guys have told the Jets, hey, we're not interested. That's fine. It seems like that's the case with Pete Carroll. The whole Mike McCarthy thing seems more like it's the Jets side of things, where there's been some rumors that McCarthy would actually be interested in the Jets job. It's more so the Jets don't really like McCarthy, which makes no sense to me. I'm not going to continue to go down that road. You guys know how I feel about not interviewing some of these candidates, but they got to get moving here a little bit, right? Some of these top options, boom, right here, Borgonzi, many people's top option. He was my number 2 off the board here for the Jets. Now, it's not full-on panic time. Again, luckily for the Jets, the only other general manager vacancy, you look at it's the Raiders, right? So it's not like you've got 5-6 other teams looking for general managers here. The Jets still have a lot of these candidates right in their hands if they want them. But it's time to pivot. Dimitrov, Mike Greenberg, Alec Hallaby is a guy that I think a lot of people are interested in. I don't love Hallaby, but I do understand the interest. Brian Gaines, a guy that has felt like over the last week or so has picked up some steam as a potential candidate. And then you have some of the other retreads. Again, we'll throw up. And this isn't all the names, but you get into the Ryan Grigson. Do you pair him with a Flores? Chris Spielman, who's not on this list, but he's another name to look into. How interested are they in some of the other retreads of a Ray Farmer, a John Robinson? I would stay far away from the Louis Riddicks and the Jim Nagy's of the world. Just not enough experience for me. But are one of those guys maybe a name that they like because of their, scouting backgrounds and stuff like that? But I think it should be a sign. Hey, ideally this week and into next week, you got to start in-person interviews with 5 or 6 candidates, maybe 4 of your finalists in person and figure this out. Get the GM in place, make the hire on the head coach, let him, sit in on the head coach round 2 interviews and do this thing the right way. It's January 17th. The Titans fired their GM 10 days ago. They identified a top candidate and they found him. I mean, maybe that's the case with the Jets where they don't love any of these guys, but hey, look, you're going to have to make a decision at some point. Can't just keep throwing, can't keep throwing stuff at a wall and the phrase, right? Throwing it at the wall and hope it sticks. So we'll see where the Jets go from here as Borgonzi's off the board. All right, moving on here to one of the more under the radar, I guess you want to consider him an underrated coaching candidate for the New York Jets that has picked up a little bit of steam here over the last couple days and has been talked about a lot with the Jets from an offensive coordinator perspective, not so much from a head coach perspective, but from an OC perspective, and that is former Jet Josh McCown, who spent 2 seasons with the team, 2017, 2018, of course, and a guy that many around the league believe is ready for a head coach opportunity. Many around the league believe McCown is totally ready for the opportunity to be a head coach. You go back to McCown's playing days, and everybody, I think, around the league knew he was eventually going to get into coaching once his days were up as a player in the NFL, and that's been exactly the case. But there was a report that came out earlier today from Adam Schefter, who was on the Pat McAfee show today, basically saying that the only way Josh McCown would leave Minnesota, and this is just Schefter, from what he's hearing and all that stuff, he doesn't feel he would leave Minnesota to become an offensive coordinator for the other team. He feels the only way McCown would leave Kevin O'Connell's staff and that Vikings offensive staff would be for a head coach opportunity. It would not be to go be another team's offensive coordinator. He currently, of course, is the quarterback's coach for Minnesota. So it feels like the potential of a Brian Flores, Josh McCown head coach OC combo could maybe be a little bit more unrealistic than maybe some of us thought. And maybe it happens, who knows? But that seems to be the reports, and what people are feeling right now is McCown's it's going to need to take a head coach job for him to leave Minnesota at this current moment. And I've always said I'd be totally on board with McCown as a head coach, or as an offensive coordinator, rather. I'd be totally on board. And that was one of my positives for Flores, right? You bring in Flores. I like the potential of McCown as an OC and what he can do with this offense right now, with these playmakers right now, and maybe what he can do down the road if you draft a quarterback this year to develop or whatever, right? Wherever the Jets decide to go with the quarterback position. I like the potential there with McCown. But it feels like a little bit here, things are pick up some steam as him as maybe a potential head coach. Now, a lot of people got to realize, right, McCown was actually a finalist for the Texans job in 2022. That year they took Lovie Smith. That was a dumpster fire. They ended up hiring DeMeco Ryans in 2023. Who knows if things work out differently with McCown, but he got a job with the Texans as he got a job, he was a finalist for the Texans job in 2022. So this was a guy that already here has been deeply considered to be a head coach in the NFL. Well respected around the NFL, and something that makes him an interesting candidate for the Jets is he's well respected in that building. You go back and listen to some people talk about those 2017 and 2018 seasons while he was with the team. They say, he had a lot of fans in the building, and he was one of the biggest, really the biggest leader in the building. Kind of a guy that was almost like a coach as a player in a way. Just a leader. Guys really rallied around him. He was a really big piece in the locker room. Similar to kind of what like a Morgan Moses is right now with this team. A warrior. Players love him. Players respect him. A guy that obviously the organization respects. He's been here twice now. in 2021 and even this past season, a guy that'll play through injuries, go out there and do anything for his teammates. That was similar to McCown and what he brought during his time here as the bridge in 2017 and in the backup for Darnold in 2018, which saw him play in a couple games as well. I've said this about McCown. I've said this about Brady. He's not my first choice. He's not my first choice. He's not. You guys know where I stand. I am Brian Flores, Aaron Glenn. If those two guys, and this is where I'm at, is if those two guys don't come here, which I doubt, I think if I had to make a prediction right now, Aaron Glenn's going to be the next head coach for the Jets. I think all signs are pointing towards that. I think there's mutual interest from both sides. It takes two to tango. I think it's going to take a little bit. The Lions have to be eliminated pretty much first, but I think in the end of this all, I do think Glenn will end up at the coach. I would actually be pretty shocked if Aaron Glenn's not the Jets head coach. And if it's not Glenn, I do think it's Flores. I'd be very shocked if it's neither of those guys. And maybe that's crazy to say because it is the Jets. They never cease to, really surprise or amaze you. They always find ways to do things differently. They always find ways to surprise you. There's never a dull moment. So I guess I wouldn't be shocked if it's somebody else. But I've said this a lot now. You've gotten to the point of this coaching search where if they're not going to go out and get any of these other big names that are available or interview any of those other big names, if Flores and Glenn don't come here and you're left with potential options like Arthur Smith and Matt Nagy and Steve Spagnuolo and Ron Rivera and Vance Joseph as your retread experienced options, I would be on board with taking a risk at that point and hiring a Joe Brady or hiring a Josh McCown, where you hope that maybe you run into your next Kevin O'Connell or you run into your next Zach Taylor, where you get a young offensive mind with not much coaching experience, but he can come in, change the offense, become a good coach, and turn things around that way. Not my first choice, but I've said this a lot. If Glenn and Flores fail somehow and they don't come here, which I'd be shocked if either one of them are not here when this is all said and done. If that doesn't happen, I've said it. I would take the risk of, at that point, three top options are off the board. Vrabel's already gone. Flores already gone. Those are the top two experienced guys I wanted. Glenn gone. The top inexperienced guy that I want. If that's the case, then why not take a risk on a Brady? Why not take a risk on a McCown over a Vance Joseph who did nothing in his 2 years in Denver? Arthur Smith, who I've talked about yesterday, and I said it would be a disaster. No way. Matt Nagy, no way. Steve Spagnuolo, no way. And the only two situations where I would have been okay with a Matt Nagy or Steve Spagnuolo would have been, I could tolerate it more if Borgonzi was the GM, right? Borgonzi coming from Kansas City has the connection with both those guys. If you would have told me Borgonzi and Spagnuolo or Nagy, I could tolerate it a little bit more. But now that Borgonzi off the board, no way do I want either of those guys. And Ron Rivera, his time's up. Let's be honest. So at that point, it's like, see what you have in one of those guys. Take a chance over a retread guy we already kind of know who they are, what they're going to do here. That's the only way I do it. I think some people are getting a little too hyped up in the Josh McCown thing. He's only been a quarterback's coach for 2 years, very inexperienced. He hasn't been an offensive coordinator yet. I love him as an OC. He's not my top choice as a head coach. I still think it's got to be Flores or Glenn. But if it's not those two guys, then at that point, it's like, take a risk. Your top three guys are off the board. Then maybe you do take a chance. And that's where I could see a world where they do take a chance on a Brady, on a McCown. You go through the rest of the list. Maybe even a Bobby Slowick, who would be far down on my list too. I want nothing to do with Bobby Slowick. I would take Brady and McCown over Slowick easily. But that's where it gets to, where you take one of those three young offensive minds. And you look at some of the other coaches too, for the crowd that maybe is on board with Josh McCown, right? For those of you out there, you look at coaches with minimal experience, offensive minds that have become head coaches. There have been some that have been successful, right? Zach Taylor, he was the quarterback's coach with the Rams in 2018 prior to taking over the Bengals job. Never had OC experience. Mike McDaniel, he was the OC for 1 year in San Francisco in 2021. Dan Campbell, he was a tight ends coach with the Saints from 2016 to 2020. He was the Miami Dolphins interim coach in 2015 for 12 games. But outside of that, he was working with the tight ends his entire career. No major experience. Never an OC, never any of that. Kevin Stefanski was an OC with the Vikings in 2019. Sean McVay, OC with the Redskins for 3 years. A little bit of experience there. But I would say for what McVay is kind of the, anytime you talk about hiring an OC, everybody goes right to, oh, look what Sean McVay's done. Look what Sean McVay's been, So McVay's on there. You want to look at the Kevin O'Connell route. He was an OC for 3 years, split between the Redskins in 2019, at the time the Redskins, now the Commanders, and then the Rams from 2020 to 2021. You even want to say that, Dave Canales with the Panthers. He was an OC with the Bucs in 2023 for 1 year. I wouldn't necessarily consider him a total success yet. He did get more to Bryce Young this year. Next year's a big year for him, but he's another name just through last year's cycle that a team took a chance on. Zach Taylor, McDaniel, Dan Campbell, Stefanski, McVay, Kevin O'Connell have all been to the playoffs. McVay's 2 Super Bowls. He's got a Super Bowl under his belt. Taylor's been to a Super Bowl. Dan Campbell this year has a chance to get to one. Got to the title game last year. 1 seed this year. Stefanski, been to the playoffs. Right, so there is a track record of first-time OC guys or limited offensive experience, offensive minds with limited coaching experience panning out. But again, you look at where the Jets are as an organization, and you think to yourself, they need a CEO culture changer. Is McCown really that guy? I don't necessarily think so. I think you're better off going towards a Flores and a Glenn. Those 2 guys well over McCown. I think the McCown hype, like him as an OC, great person. I think he's a great offensive mind. I think he is a guy that has potential in this league to be a head coach, but just where the Jets are, I think you're better off going off of one of those other guys that can be more of that CEO culture guy over McCown. But like I've said, for about 3rd or 4th time, if you miss on Glenn and Flores, I would be on board at that point in taking a risk in one of those first-time offensive guys than going after some of those horrible retreads that would do absolutely nothing here. You take the higher ceiling with the unknown floor in a Joe Brady or McCown over the, what your floor is going to be with Arthur Smith and those guys. You don't really know what your ceiling is going to be. You take kind of that risk at that point. That's where I would then have a serious conversation about hiring. But who knows? Maybe the Jets view it differently. We'll see. What are your thoughts on the Josh McCown? I don't really know if I want to call it hype, because I haven't seen too many people. There's not many people out there that are basically like, I think Aaron Glenn's more hype. Aaron Glenn he's a favorite for the job, and many odds show him as a favorite for the job. You've got players already, Jermaine Johnson retweeting that he'd want him here. That's more hype. That's more get him in the building. I would more say McCown, it's I don't know. There's interest. It feels like it's a possibility. If you don't get your top 2, McCown could be next up. That may be the way the Jets view it. Maybe Glenn's their 1, Flores is 2, and who knows, maybe McCown, it really is their 3. Where they say, hey, don't get those 2 guys. Come on board. So let me know what you think in the comments section down below about the latest New York Jets general manager and head coach news. Mike Borgonzi going to the Titans. What are your thoughts on that? And what are your thoughts on Josh McCown gaining steam as a potential Jets head coach option, as the potential next head coach here for the New York Jets? What are your thoughts on all that? Stay tuned. We'll have a lot more content coming your way as the GM and coach search continues here throughout January. Stay tuned. And until next time, JETS, 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 Jets.